Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name's Marj Hamilton, and I'm here to interview Ron Anderson today. And I've just written a little notes by way of introduction. Disclaimer or spoiler alert to start with, that I am one of Ron's biggest fans. So just so I'll put that on the table straight away.
You're the only one.
I have had the great privilege and amazing opportunity to have been in a band with Ron for several years. Ron plays with great skill, overlaying great talent. He brings all of himself to his performances. He can be very sentimental. He can be cheeky and irreverent. He can be serious, and he can be having pure fun. When I watch him playing the piano, I'm reminded of the statue of the thinker by Rodin. Ron's intellect and intelligence are so clear to see when he's immersed playing that piano, doing a solo. And when he plays the saxophone, he closes his eyes, and I get the sense that he's transported to another place and he takes us with him. So, Ron Anderson, Australian jazz royalty. So happy to be here with you today.
As a Republican, I reject the idea of royalty. I'm sorry.
We'll put that on the table as well. There'll be light on the table. Ron, I've given you the sporty glass here, the tennis glass, because so we can differentiate our glasses. But I also thought you've been swimming this morning, and I just thought the little sporty thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me, but I'm a little bit uncertain about what to cover here. But when I thought about this interview, I thought I might start in my teenagers when I liked the phrase, I caught the black music bus. Now, that was the name of a radio show years ago, or perhaps not that long ago, but it was all about black music. And for some reason, I caught the black music bus when I was about 15 or 16, 14, 15 or 16, somewhere there. And without realising it, I was kind of hooked into something else. It was music, yes, but there was also something else associated with the music, a kind of element of black culture. So for years I was mad about the blues, black blues singers, as well as jazz musicians. And I even read a lot of books about black history, black culture and black history at that stage. So for something happened to me, and this is roughly in the late 50s when, as I said, I caught the black music bus. Now, it's been with me all my life, and now I feel as though in some ways it's a kind of narrowing perspective, and I've had to broaden it out because I also do like classical music, but I have to train myself to like it. It didn't come naturally. Do you like classical music?
I do, but I'm always oriented more towards jazz.
Yeah.
But I do listen to classical music.
What age did you get into jazz?
Probably all my life. When my mum was pregnant, my dad was a sax player, and he used to have Ella Fitzgerald playing while she was pregnant, and hoping that would help me to be musical in later life. So.
Well, the reason I ask is because mine was a little bit more unusual because all my mates in the local area were not into jazz, and so I sometimes wondered why I got into it and how I got into it. And it's one of those inexplicable things. My parents were musical but were not into jazz. They were church and choir people and classical, and in fact I can remember spending some hours with my father years ago telling him about swing. He tried to say, how do you swing? And so I notated it out with triplets and the broken triplets, and he still didn't get it. So anyway, that's where I started, and it was trad jazz originally and blues, but yeah, my brother played saxophone and clarinet and had the old swing records, and I kind of listened to Benny Goodman and Tommy Dorsey and those kind of people, but I recognised they weren't always jazz. My feeling was kind of closer to the core of jazz, I suppose. And I mean, like most people, I just started thumping around on a piano with lack of skill. Still have it. I had 2 years of piano training, not enough to develop full facility, but enough to be able, I could move my fingers a bit. And then I gave up. Unfortunately, I gave up, but I wished I'd gone on and could play better, particularly with the left hand. So I just mucked around on the piano, had a saxophone, and then, sorry, I'm going a bit too much like the story of my life, but at university, I had a saxophone, I played it a bit, but I was never really into it. I didn't have a piano because I'd left home, and you didn't have a piano, and so I therefore, particularly straight after university in flats, didn't have a piano, so I moved to saxophone, and then suddenly I found flute. Well, that's another story, because I found that I could get not a great sound, but a reasonable sound fairly easily on flute. So, you know, by the time I was 21, I could play a bit of saxophone, flute, and a bit of piano, but really, you know, way down there. But anyway, that's for some reason that kind of what I'll call the interest in black culture was a very strong component, and things just, my wife would say I've become obsessive, but perhaps I always was, but I took an interest and studied a bit and practiced a bit, and before I knew it I was getting jobs. People were paying me to play this rubbish.
Were you playing what you think of as jazz? So it's not the sort of all the popular people that people might think of as jazz, but you're talking about, the roots and the heart and soul.
Yeah,
were you playing that early on, or was there an audience for that back then?
I wasn't. Playing. I wasn't playing at a level where you could call it, but my interest was it developed fairly quickly into the Charlie Parkers and the John Coltrane's, the fairly serious jazz players, and I regarded anybody else as kind of commercial, silly, but that's kind of been I suppose, the guiding star, that there is a path that's set by all the greats, Armstrong, Parker, and the rest. You do what you can to try and get onto that train, but the rest is perhaps less comfortable or less authentic or pure, perhaps. But I certainly, it's taken me 60 years to be able to get an approximation of a third-rate Charlie Parker, so you spend your life aiming at something, and you hope you get close to it. But on the way, I did a lot of other stuff, like I played in rock and roll bands, a bit of a diversion. Because, I mean, if I hadn't gone professional with a pop band or rock and roll band, I'd probably have remained in university and that would have been my career. But I left academia to go on the road with Kush in the 70s, and that was good and bad. Musically, it was okay, but it was never my favourite band. But it achieved a small measure of success and meant that I could call myself a musician for 18 months or something. And then I went back into academia, and I was always had a foot in both worlds. And I found that uncomfortable, being a musician, in inverted commas. That many of the musicians didn't take you seriously because you weren't fully professional. But in the other side, in the academic or teaching side, they knew I had another life outside, and they knew that I went out and worked 3 nights a week or something like that. So it was a kind of uncomfortable position. But, you do what you make your decisions as you go through at the time,
Listening to you talking, Ron, and I'm just harking back to my introduction, where when I do watch you play the piano, and I think about that statue of the thinker, and when you talk to me about your approach to music, that image of the sort of purity and the intellect and the just taking that position and holding it really makes more sense to me, that I've actually feel like I've seen that part of you without perhaps realising it. That you do bring a lot of intellect and direction and focus to to your playing. You've studied, you've read about these musicians, and you've been on a course that's been of great interest to you.
I think I realised fairly early on that there were, amongst the top jazz musicians, there was a craft, a skill, a set of, well, what we would call pedagogics, things that you can teach and learn. And I think perhaps because I was kind of academically trained in some ways, I honed in onto that, the techniques, and so I was always conscious that there were techniques to learn and to practice about chord changes in particular, on how to voice them, and the kind of mechanics of the music always did interest me. I hope I was never dominated by them, so everything sounded like an exercise. But I was well aware that there was a jazz pedagogy, and I was kind of interested in that. The kind of the bricks and mortar that make the music and how they have changed. And I wouldn't describe it as intellect, but I have a kind of analytic mind of breaking things down and doing the techniques. But as I said, I think that's either a significant transfer from my academic training, or I went into those academic fields because I had that kind of bent.
And both for sure.
And it can be a hang-up, being too technical. The other side of my playing that I don't prefer, but I like to do it. I love playing what I call feel piano, where you get a groove going. And I've actually tried to, in times, write down the feel, what I'm playing, and it really is very, very difficult to do it. It just kind of happens sometimes. But to establish a kind of feel is really the guts of the music in some ways. If I could indulge a personal reminiscence with name dropping, I did a show just in the late 80s when Lou Rawls was in town, and I was in part of the horn section. And the details don't matter, but he let the band have one number to themselves, and you could actually feel the bandstand lift. They were playing a moderate blues, but they were not reading music, they were playing their natural thing. And the energy that the band, just for that one number, they let them do it, was fantastic. I'd never experienced it before, only occasionally since. And when I was talking about it, I don't know if you remember Alan Lee, he had a similar experience when he was in America. He used to play at a roadhouse outside wherever he was living, and they'd often do similar numbers, but there were a couple of numbers where they were as we say, in the pocket. Everything was right, and the feeling that was generated was just so propulsive and so meaningful. And it's very hard to replicate that, particularly with most of the bands we play in are unrehearsed or under-rehearsed, and we don't really allow ourselves a chance to establish that, that basic ground of rhythmic feel. But that was just once where I'm kind of going against your notion that I had an intellect or analytic, but the other side of me, there is a part of playing which is purely feel and purely intuitive, and it can't be, I don't know if it can be taught or not, it can be communicated. I'd like to think it can be taught, but it really can't, I don't think. And you can kind of feel when you're with musicians around you who with which you can share that feeling or that groove. But to try and capture that groove and turn it on and turn it off is actually quite hard, which I suspect is why some of us drink a bit on the stage to try and relax.
Yeah.
One of my mentors, a saxophone player, used to talk about alcohol so that he gets onto automatic pilot. Now, there's a danger here, of course, if you get onto automatic pilot, you crash. But if you can, there's a sense in which when you're playing the music, you've got to go beyond the cerebral analytic level and just feel it.
Yeah.
And to be confident enough to play what you think's going to happen and go for it. But that's quite difficult to do. You can't turn it on. Well, I can't turn it on or turn it off. Sometimes you can, but most often it's very difficult to explain how and when it happens. I think it communicates itself to the audience.
It does. If I use the example of a band playing and all the members of the band are sort of taking, not instructions, that's not the word, taking what's the word I'm looking for?
Cues?
Yeah, cues, thanks Ron. Taking cues from each other about when to come in and, when to, you play or, go to the top or whatever. But when you're playing, you've got your eyes closed, and so there's no sense at all that, other than everybody just in that zone together and in that confidence that you have with each other and that you're listening to each other, that you're going to be communicating with each other. I mean, I know you do sometimes, but a lot of the time you just got your eyes closed and you are just purely playing, and if everyone had gotten up and left the room, you wouldn't know till you'd opened your eyes,
It's. I often wondered why I closed my eyes. My wife talks about that. I close my eyes closed.
Just tune everything out.
I suppose it is that, it achieves a focus.
Just feel, just let your heart talk.
But on the other hand, there are times when you kind of got to read the music and read it. And to go back to one of the things, one of the difficulties is the music that we play is often, complex is too strong a word, but it's more difficult. You can't just lug it by ear. And so you've kind of got to read some part of it at least. And that, in fact, can be a barrier. I was worried about having a music stand between me and the audience. But on the other hand, I needed that for some of the songs because some of the songs are hard to remember. Now, again, let's be brutally frank. The people that I admire and would love to be able to play this music night after night for hours, and so they don't have to read the music. They can, because it's inbuilt in them. And yet for those of us who are semi-professional jazz musicians, we don't give ourselves the immersion in the music to play it night after night, hour after hour, year after year, so we're very much part-time. A couple of times a week I will play jazz saxophone or something like that. I think the point being that at the level that I think most of us want to play like is immersing yourself in what roughly used to be called the jazz life. And the jazz life doesn't involve a mortgage, children, or a stable home relationship. It means going out with the boys night after night, drinking till 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that's how these guys got so good at playing very fast tempos. They would play them night after night, and the one song, they might play it in 4 sets, 8, 9, 10, and then go to a jam session and still be playing that very fast song at 4 o'clock in the morning. But look, that's it's kind of not relevant because most of us are not going to do that, live that kind of life. Nor should I want to, you know.
Yeah, good point. When you talk about the people that you really look up to like that, that is also a time in the past, though, isn't it? Also,
Yeah.
when people when musicians were getting a lot more, there was a lot more scope to be out playing every night.
Well,
I mean, you must remember that.
Yes, there were times when, you know, you do the gig and then you'd be looking to go on and either have another drink or keep playing.
Yeah.
And that's the period of the 30s, 40s and 50s, and probably still is, but in America, where the same kind of intensity of experience, of immersion in the jazz culture. I assume there are people in America who do that, who play every day, apart from their own practice. They go out and jam and play and continue on into the early hours. But you're right, it's not as common, certainly not in Australia.
No, we've both met lots of musicians who will tell you that they used to be playing, you know, most nights of the week. And one of the things you and I spoke about before we started was a little bit about music in the modern era, and that sort of we'll talk about that as well, because things have changed, haven't they?
Yeah.
Who do you know who's out playing all of those nights of the week? People's lifestyles and the way they socialise and things, the way they listen to music, so much has changed, hasn't it?
Yes, well, many of us now listen to jazz more on records than we ever did live. We listen to CDs, well, I still CDs and records. And in some cases, I think I'd prefer listening to my old favourites rather than going out and hearing somebody, because when you go out and hear somebody, the sound's not right, or it's too cold, or, you know, or they're not having a good night. As the night I saw Art Pepper in Melbourne, he was awful. Sorry, that might have to be edited out. Phil Woods was good live, but not all of them are. I mean, perhaps what we're saying is it's very difficult to achieve a consistently high level of performance night after night, particularly if you're under the influence of artificial stimulants. But it's the way it's changed, and we can rue the fact that it's changed. But on the other hand, I'm not certain that I want a society where there are clubs open all night, where alcohol and heroin and prostitution and all that stuff is, and that was associated with the jazz life of the 30s and 40s. I suppose that's my more social conservatism coming through. But the real issue is, could you be a professional jazz musician in the world now? A professional, live purely playing jazz? Yes, but I don't know that there are that many of them now. Could you do it in Australia as a professional jazz musician who only played jazz and made a living? There might be a handful or a dozen throughout Australia, but maybe, and I don't even know, because most of the musicians have, once the jobs started drying up, went into teaching in some kind of way, and so
isn't it?
And we've got this now kind of absurd, contradictory thing. Very good musicians are teaching kids how to play this music, and in the back of their mind is the realisation that these kids are never going to be able to play it in public, even if they get good, you know, because there's just not the opportunity. So, I feel that most musicians who have teaching, they can help the kids play their instrument better and play the music, but at the back of their mind, will these kids be able to make a living or get enough enjoyment out of it to continue on? And that's it's a bit of a negative conclusion. I'm not confident that there's enough around to encourage kids to want to keep working. And you have to do it, particularly if you want to be good. You've got to start in your teens and do the practice then, because as you find out, in your 50s and 60s, doing the practice doesn't help, or you've got to do so much more. But I mean, it's a bit sad, but life changes. You can't just get stuck in a rut and say, that was fantastic back there, let's recreate it. It can't be, I don't think it can be recreated, not satisfactorily anyway.
You can probably go overseas to certain places and experience it, just get a taste of it, but that's not the same as living it. And
No,
as you say, there are, you know, many great things about the other life.
Yeah. Yes.
What about your teaching life? What did you teach?
Oh, I taught history and politics. I did an academic course in history and if I say history, it sounds like I know facts and things, but it was more analytic history, you know, using history as a tool of analysis and social theory and how does society run and how does it change.
Okay.
So you know, that's been an abiding interest, and hence I spent about 30 years teaching off and on. And I'm often pleased in a way that I didn't get immersed in teaching music, even though I like it, but I did some teaching of it, but not much, but because it kept my life in two separate channels, and I quite like having the two separate channels, even though I bemoan the fact that there's conflict and I really should have been in one or the other.
Can I tell you a little story, Ron? Before we started the interview today, I was talking to Steve, who's very kindly recording us today, and he was telling me about the sort of work he used to do, editing and just a life sort of immersed in music. And he was saying that he really felt like he'd fallen into sort of living the dream, his dream, but he found that when he got home from work, he was no longer playing music anymore, and had somehow, like doing it all the time, had actually had the effect of sort of deadening his interest a little bit.
Yes,
I don't know.
I can imagine that happening. I can imagine it happening, but it hasn't happened for me. I still listen to jazz a hell of a lot. Too much, my wife would say. And I haven't lost the interest in it, but I must admit, and again, this might have to be edited out, I find a lot of modern saxophone playing and jazz playing, I don't want to know about it. It's self-indulgent. It's not nice tone, goes on too long, doesn't communicate much with me as the audience, and I suspect with a lot of the audience. But I mean, that I don't want to go into an anti-modern jazz kind of thing, but there is a sense in which the kind of craftsmanship that I associate with playing jazz, the 40s and 50s, 60s and 70s, has gone a bit, and the more modern forms of that tradition are not as approachable as for me as I would like. So I'd rather go home and listen to Phil Woods rather than go out and hear an avant-garde or a contemporary saxophone player. I feel that, but I feel on the other hand I have a duty of loyalty to those being part of the audience for those kind of people. So I don't listen to live jazz much. I think on the thing, if I'm there and I would like to be playing it, or else I'd rather stay home and listen to it better on records. But I believe that happens to classical people too. They can find too many imperfections in hearing the orchestra, but on the records they've got at home, the imperfections don't there. But other people like the imperfections, so it's...
Or don't hear them.
Yeah. Yes, it's a lifetime study, and I use the word study as to encompass the kind of emotional elements, not just the analytic. But I think as I approach my old age, I think you can call yourself officially old when you get to 80, and I'm heading that way. The next issue you've got to face is, can you give it up? And how do you give it up? And what happens if you give it up? So, and I'm looking at musicians around who are cycling down in their interest, not in their interest, but in their capabilities, and they're thinking about giving it away. And you wonder, well, it's been such an important part of my life since I was about 15, so that's 60 odd years. Can you suddenly turn the tap off? And what happens to your life if you do? Sorry, I'm getting a bit maudlin here.
Oh, I was going to say philosophical.
Yeah, perhaps.
But, you know, it fits in with your metaphor of the train, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, that the train's going along and it goes through different stops along the way and different vistas.
Except if I can, the notion of a train is it has a destination, and you like the track it's on. I'm not sure that I like the track that a lot of modern jazz is on. I like melody. I like nice tone.
Yeah.
But it's still got a swing. But I think there's a capacity of self-editing too that's important. That you've got to learn to control all your impulses. Shouldn't just be a torrent of notes. There should be some kind of focus and way that the notes are shaped to produce a line. I don't mean to say that we should only play old melodies and things like that, but there just seems to me in modern jazz there's an element of self-indulgent, lack of self-editing, that almost any kind of, well, there were people who would do primal screaming and assume that that was music. That was one of my stops on the station on the train.
Primal screaming.
Well, yeah. Right, there are bands called that. But I mean, the notion then with those kind of thing is that it's purely expressive, that there is an emotional state, and if you scream it out, you're fully expressing it. Well, yeah, not for me, thank you.
No, not for me either.
Some discipline, editing, focus.
Melody.
Though the sense of what constitutes a melody is always been, we don't use the word melody now, we don't play songs. Jazz songs are often called themes, or they're not tunes because you can't remember a lot of them, but they're still interesting to play. I'm still not quite as old-fashioned as all that.
So we were having a little break on our train journey then. I was wondering, Ron, if you were on the train, what position, what sort of personnel would you be if you were on this train? Would you be a passenger or a driver, or would you be stoking the engine, or would you be looking at signals? Or who would you be on the train?
I don't think I'd be the driver. I think I'd be more the... well, if I used the plane, I might be more like the navigator, or
Right.
The person who was aware of where it was going and why we were going in that direction, or something like that, which I suppose doesn't work for the train driver because the tracks are laid out. But
I'm sure there's more than one track they can take.
I've never... I don't find being a band leader particularly enjoyable. There's a lot more pressure of being a band leader. Even if they're little gigs here and there, you've got to worry if they all turn up on time and be happy with the keep the employer happy and all those kind of things, and then worry about what you play. But on the other hand, being a sideman and being told what to play is always not always good. You know, I don't want to do that song, or it's in the wrong key, or it's too fast. But you have to accept those kind of constraints. But it does, the point that's hovering around in my consciousness at the moment is one of the things that I was very slow to learn was about the music business. And it is a business in, well, anywhere. And you've got to learn to play the game. It's not a game, but you've got to learn the conventions. And I often think more of us would had better careers if we were better at self-promotion or more confident in talking to generate work. I have worked for band leaders who seemed to be able to get jobs just like that. They could talk their way into jobs. And then they get a band to do it, and the band didn't always do as good as the job that they took. And that's become particularly important for younger people now, who you can see them building their careers using social media, and building networks or developing networks using computer or modern technology, and I'm sure more of them have got more of a control or trying to direct their careers, whereas when I grew up, if somebody rang you for a gig and you could do it, you do it. But the work was generated somehow outside that. But these days, and perhaps this is a good thing for jazz music and music generally, is that people now have the capacity to structure and direct their own careers and produce their own video or Facebook, YouTube kind of things that are pushing in that direction, which is something which people of my generation find a bit strange, and it's a bit, oh, that's publicity, that's advertising, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, it feels
I feel
a bit.
Self-promotion is not a good thing for people of my generation.
I was thinking when you're talking about you get a call, and I was thinking that was if you were home, take the phone call, because the phone ring, but if you went home,
you didn't get the gig.
Well, you weren't. You went home together. There wasn't even an answering machine. But
well, these days they leave a message, and you think, oh, I've got a couple of hours to consider that message. Can I do that job, or do I want to? But if you don't get back in within 5 or 10 minutes, sometimes you get the sense in which somebody's moved on to the next person. Yep. In other words, they want instantaneous response, which doesn't come good for me, at least. Yes, it's. But I mean, what I think I'm really saying is that being part of being a jazz musician or a musician interested in jazz in Melbourne is also involved in a whole host of other areas which have their own little scenes, and which you kind of got to be on top of or aware of. There was the rock scene, and then for years I played in a blues band, 1 or 2 nights a week playing blues, and that had its own little area. Or you might do, and I did a little bit of playing not many sessions, but recording sessions. And so in each of these little areas where there are pockets, you kind of got to know how to play the game. And no, that sounds as though it's mechanical. You've got to know how the system works and how you can fit into it, or else you don't get asked back.
Yeah, you've got to be prepared to do it too. Even if you've still got to be prepared to do it.
Well, again, I've got a little anecdote. I used to do a bit of work with another saxophone player, and he'd been doing these gigs for years and was frankly, I think, a bit bored by it. But we'd have a little joke agreement. The first one to look at their watch during the night loses. And he'd always have lost by 20 past 8 for an 8 o'clock gig. And it's made me think, why did he accept the job if he's bored by it, or perhaps it wasn't up to his expectation or something like that. And again, but we all have those kind of jobs where it's not what you want, it's not what you think is great. And I think that's partly, it may be why I play too many instruments, simply because I recognise that I have it by playing all the saxophones, flute and a bit of piano, I might get more jobs, but that was never my motive. I just was interested in the sound of it, and could I control it, let alone master it. And mastering an instrument is really a difficult thing. It's a lifetime study of any of those instruments. Hence, I've always felt that I've been a jack of all trades, and I would have liked the opportunity just to work night after night on one of the instruments, but it just doesn't happen in Melbourne or in Australia perhaps, or perhaps anywhere these days. the
Can I
opportunity.
ask you about the jazz festivals?
Yeah.
Like, because, you know, when you and I bump into each other, it'll inevitably be at one of the jazz festivals. And so that's a different sort of, you know, idea to going to a gig and playing a gig. You know, you're going to a place, you're travelling to a place, you're having a holiday. There's lots of people there you're going to bump into. Lots of venues running. There's a sort of buzz in the air. How do you feel about going to the jazz festivals?
I love them, though I'm getting a little bit tired of them in the sense that perhaps I'm playing with the similar bands there and similar people in the audience, or if not the same audience. And that's actually an interesting phenomenon that for years I would never have considered playing at a jazz festival for nothing. Playing for nothing, that was against my principles. But after a while, when you get a bit older, you realise, well, look, I've spent my life wanting to play, so why would you knock back an opportunity to play amongst people who know what's going on? Mind you, I think many of them have now, I think we might be on the cusp of them changing their function, because there are people, when I first started playing in those jazz festivals, everyone was older than I am. Well, those people have now died off, literally, and I'm now part of the generation that's been going to them for 20, 25 years, and I don't see too many young people coming up to go to them. So I think it may be more difficult to keep those jazz festivals going, but we can just wait and see. I think part of my objection is that there's been a certain sameness about them, because playing the same kind of bands. One of the ones I quite enjoy is particularly going interstate, where there's a chance to play with different musicians who I haven't played with before, or not played very much with. And I find that a little bit more interesting. But we shall see, as they say. Let me answer the question you didn't ask me. Would I do it again? Yes, I think I would. Yeah. While there's frustrations in being only a semi-professional, even if that, and a teacher in an academic era, and trying to bind with family and things, I think I would. I don't think I would like the idea of being a drunken drug addict jazz musician,
right?
Of which they're still around. We've got to be careful. It's part of the jazz life. One of the very sad things is to see how many younger musicians, or at least of the next generation overseas, who have become caught up in that kind of life, which is very sad. Brilliant musicians, and it's those kind of, let's call them the pathologies of the industry, are still around. So you've got to be very careful about those kinds of things.
I think fame and the need for self just sort of other people's admiration and other people's acceptance of you. Affirmation has become, it's always been a thing, but I think it's become a very big thing with the advent of social media. People are constantly wanting to see if they're liked or not liked, and they're devastated or they're elated. And
I was amazed at this by my own experiences as a father. When I was a kid, we as boys, we didn't give a damn about what we wore until we were, 16 or 18, when we would start to get out in that. But some of my children from about the age of 6 or 8 would insist upon having proper the proper name jeans, and wouldn't be seen dead just slobbing around in jeans and a t-shirt. And I found that quite surprising, that the pressure for something, I'm not searching for a word, the sense that your presentational self is the expression the social researchers took, that from an early age many young kids have an enhanced sense of how they are presenting themselves.
An awareness.
Yeah,
an awareness of what other people think. And,
yeah.
and
This was long before the
Yeah.
social media age.
Maybe it's sort of, it's got its pros and cons that people, when you're talking about self-promotion and things, that people feel more comfortable to be thinking about how they look and how they come across, and quite comfortable to promote themselves, sometimes quite shamelessly. There's,
Yes,
like everything, there's an upside and downside.
Yeah.
Same with everything,
but it really should. I would like to. I'm enough of an idealist to think it should focus on the music. The music is the thing, rather than the package that it's in.
Yeah.
But often in those packages there is some excellent music as well, but it's not just pure show and fluff. But it's there is a sense in which you think that pure musical talent, which is quite rare, I'm convinced, real people who are very, very good at it, and intuitive, that's really quite rare. And perhaps it would be best to leave the music industry to those people who have really got that central drive and direction and focus.
Well, they can certainly inspire us all.
Yeah.
I feel like we've sort of come to a good place to kind of wind up today.
Right.
Do you feel that way?
Yes, I'm comfortable. I've exposed too much of myself.
Is there anything that you would like to say that is just been on your mind that perhaps you haven't had a chance to say, or that you want to reiterate?
Just that I didn't want to make it sound too negative about jazz in Australia, but I am a little bit more negative about. I think I'm more realist about the prospects of jazz in Australia, and perhaps we have to change our notion of what jazz is. And in the world, I'm not that comfortable with a lot of what's produced and what gets played on the radio, but I don't want to be too negative about it. I just have to realise that I'm product of a generation which formed their mental horizons in the 1950s and 1960s, and things have changed.
The wow factor was pretty big, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
In those days. Yes, I think that's enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much
you very
for your
much,
time.
Steve. Thank you, Marj.
Steve.